Good afternoon, and welcome to the Alfred University Bergren Forum. My name is John D'Angelo, and I am a professor of chemistry and the coordinator for the spring 2024 season of the Bergren Forum. Today is Thursday, February 29th, as a leap year 2024. And for those of you attending the forum online here in Western New York, we are in the grips of the infamous second winter, as it is cold and there is some snow on the ground, but it is bright, and inside Nevins Theater or Powell Campus Center, it is warm and cozy. Before starting, we have really just one announcement. There will be no Bergren Forum next week since Alfred University is on spring break, but the following Thursday, March 14th, will be our next forum, and it will be given by Alfred University Director of Education Abroad, Laura Johnson. Laura's talk will be on trends in where students study abroad, and there are no additional events that I was able to find to announce this week. Today's forum will be given by Paul Butterfield, Assistant Professor of Philosophy at Alfred University, and the title of Paul's talk is right behind me. What does a joke mean? Take it away, Paul.
Okay, thank you for inviting me here, and thank you for everyone for coming to hear about me, to hear about jokes. Thank you especially to the one person who whooped. That was especially nice. So today I'm talking about jokes, and I'm talking about how we should interpret jokes. And I'm talking about how we should discern between when someone jokes and they really mean what they say, versus when someone jokes and in fact they're just being funny. It tells us nothing about what they actually believe about the world. And this is my research topic. This is my kind of my subfield within philosophy that I'm interested in. This is the stuff that I write about, stuff that I go to conferences to talk about, and the stuff that I discuss with other philosophers. So broadly speaking, I want to touch at least briefly on three questions that have come up in my research, three questions that I'm interested in, and three questions that I think most people at some point have perhaps thought about. The kind of questions that most of us mull over at some point or another. The infamous time constraints of the Bergren Forum might bite us at the end, but hopefully, at least briefly, we're going to get to all three of these questions. First question I want to discuss is the question of why there should even be an ethics of humor at all. Humor ethics is my subject, it's my topic. But lots of people think that there's really no such thing. Lots of people think that because humor is not serious, because the jokes we tell are random, they don't have any relationship with the things we actually believe, there's really no such thing as humor ethics. And anyone who complains, anyone who gets offended by a joke has made some kind of like a category error, like they've made a certain mistake in interpreting what the person has said. They've misunderstood the claim as serious when actually it was a joke. So the first question is, why should there even be a humor ethics at all? Why should we even believe in a morally bad joke in the first place? Second question is, if there are rules, how can we discern? How can we tell between a joke that is told innocently and one that's told maliciously? Spoiler alert for this one, the answer is that it's extremely difficult, but there are certain tools we can use to make an educated guess, an imperfect but educated guess. And then the most vulnerable one, the one that's most on the chopping block, depending on time, is the last one. Why does it seem like we can get away with telling jokes about our own groups that we would never be able to tell about other groups? Why is it that when I belong to a social group, I seem to get a certain amount of ethical leeway to joke about that group that I wouldn't have if I was joking about other groups? One quick disclaimer about this talk is that it will not be funny. This is a talk about comedy, but it is not a comical talk. In my defense, I will mention that I've been to many talks about humor in my time. Often speakers do take it upon themselves to inject their own jokes into the talks themselves, and not always, but often I find this excruciating. So I'm saving you that, but not actually this talk not actually being funny. One final disclaimer before we get started is that next semester, I'm going to be teaching comedy, social justice, and censorship. So if you find the stuff we talk about today interesting, you might want to enroll next semester in this course. Quick disclaimer about this course in the next semester, it will also not be funny. I also make no claims about whether my teaching is funny. I do promise that it'll be interesting and insightful, but I don't promise that it'll be funny at all. Okay. A few years ago, I was teaching a course like this. It was just called Philosophy of Comedy. And as I was teaching Philosophy of Comedy at John Jay College, a thing happened in the actual world where an actual honest-to-God celebrity got offended by the joke of another actual honest-to-God celebrity, and on live TV stormed a stage and physically attacked that celebrity because of the joke they told. And I was teaching Philosophy of Comedy that semester, and that week we had been talking about when it is and isn't justified to be offended by a joke. Manna from heaven. I couldn't believe that this thing had happened while I was teaching this course, and while I was teaching a specific little question within this course. And because it was wonderfully relevant and a real thing that people were talking about in the world, I obviously asked about it in my class. And I asked my students about Will Smith attacking Chris Rock because of jokes that Chris Rock told about Jada Pinkett Smith, Will Smith's wife. The jokes were about Jada Pinkett Smith's hair. Pinkett Smith has alopecia. That's part of the kind of story of what was potentially offensive about those kinds of jokes. And when I asked my students, I took a poll and I specifically made a note of the numbers because so I can tell you specifically what my class in spring 2022 thought about this incident. There were 25 students in that class. 8 of them thought that Will Smith's response was justified and that what he did was a reasonable response to the jokes that Chris Rock told. Another 8 students thought that Chris Rock, in telling the joke about Jada Pinkett Smith's hair, had done nothing wrong. That being offended at all would be inappropriate. Like, say, like, for example, say that no one had stormed the stage, but say that like later, like in an interview or later in like a podcast or something, Will Smith or Jada Pinkett Smith said that they were offended by what Chris Rock said. About 8 of my students, no, specifically 8 of my students, about a third of the class, thought that that would be unreasonable. To be offended whatsoever by this joke would be unreasonable. To be even mildly offended would be an overly sensitive, inappropriate response. I don't really want to say much about this except to say that when you think about it, that's really remarkable. That's a really remarkable polarization, a really remarkable range of beliefs about the same event amongst interested, educated people who are taking a philosophy of comedy course. For fully 1/3 of the class to think that physical violence was justified in response to the jokes being told, and for fully another third of the class to think that not only was physical violence not justified, but in fact, being even remotely offended would be an overly sensitive overreaction to the stuff being told. That's a huge spectrum of responses to a single event where everyone agrees about what was said, everyone agrees about the facts of the matter. And so this raises the question for me, why? Why is it that, and I think this is not unusual. I think this kind of response to jokes is common. I think often we get this polarization or the spectrum of responses in moral judgments to jokes. So why? Why would jokes cause such deeply and extremely divided opinions amongst interested parties? I think the answer is that humor is radically ambiguous, much more ambiguous than almost any other form of conversation, than almost any other form of speech. When I joke, it's radically unclear what exactly it is that I'm saying. It's radically unclear what exactly it is I'm disclosing about my beliefs and my opinions. When I'm joking, I could be, for example, exaggerating for comic effect a belief that I really hold. I could be satirizing that belief. I could be being ironic. I could be saying the exact opposite of what I think. I could be trying to humorously undermine the belief that I'm mimicking. I could be doing an impersonation of some character or some person. And so it's entirely possible for two people to tell the same joke, like textually like the same joke, but with entirely different intentions, entirely different beliefs, and entirely different implications of what they say. And I can tell a joke about some social group that can sound really incredibly mean, but in fact, I harbor no ill will towards that social group whatsoever. That's possible. That happens. People do that. And I think it's this observation here. Sorry, I think it's this previous observation that you can tell a mean-sounding joke about a group of people and harbor no ill will towards them, that causes lots of people to draw a secondary conclusion from that one. I think lots of people believe that since you can tell a joke about a group of people and harbor no since you can tell an insulting joke about a group of people and harbor no ill will towards them, therefore jokes are random. Jokes are like gibberish. Jokes bear no relation whatsoever to what we actually believe. And therefore, as a further conclusion, I should be able to say what I like as a joke because it's not serious. Jokes do not reveal anything about my real beliefs, and therefore there should be no ethics of humor. Being offended by a joke means you've always made a mistake. You've always misinterpreted what's being said as serious when it's actually random tomfoolery. Colin Geddes is a Northern Irish comedian. Frankie Boyle is a Scottish comedian. They're both known for their kind of near-the-knuckle sort of politically incorrect humor and have been for many years. When called out for the things that they've said, both Boyle and Geddes quite consistently say, yeah, but I was joking. I'm a comedian. I'm one of these comedians who tells jokes. To the extent that you're criticizing me for what I'm saying, don't worry about it. Those were jokes. You're taking them seriously, and you shouldn't, because I was joking. I've heard interviews with Joan Rivers where she said similar things. I've actually, I've also heard Joan Rivers walk that back. Joan Rivers, Joan Rivers was not totally consistent on this, but occasionally Joan Rivers has said similar things. Rivers is known for her insulting humor about other pop culture, other people in pop culture, other celebrities, and often when criticized for the things she said about people, she said, "Yeah, but I'm joking, so don't worry about it. Like it's not in the realm of me actually expressing any real view." I think this is a mistake. I think this is too quick. I think this is concluding too much on the back of the previous observation. It is possible to tell an insulting joke, a joke that sounds insulting, about someone or some group who you really respect and have no ill will towards. But that doesn't mean the jokes are random, and that doesn't mean that jokes have no connection to what we really believe. If you met me at a party and I told you a joke about, let's say, Catholics, and my joke relied on some implication that Catholics are stupid, lazy drunks. Well, having heard that one joke at that party, you might. I was raised Catholic, by the way, so we don't have to be concerned. You might. Well, you might think, oh, well, that was just a joke. So who knows? It might just be something funny that Paul heard and wanted to share. He might have just thought of a particular sort of twist on a stereotype or something. You might think, who knows? But if every single time you see me, over months and months, dozens and dozens of occasions, every single time I have a new joke for you, every time I see you, I say, oh, I've thought of another one, a new joke about how Catholics are lazy, what did I say? Stupid, lazy drunks. Every single time, at a certain point, you're going to conclude, okay, Paul actually has a problem with Catholics. I'm actually learning something about Paul's genuine beliefs about Catholics. At some point, you're going to draw that line and you're going to make that, you're going to draw that conclusion. And I think that Colin Geddes and Frankie Boyle and Joan Rivers would do the exact same thing if I constantly told them jokes about Catholics being stupid, lazy drunks. I think they would eventually draw the same conclusions, that Paul must really be exercising some actual feeling that he has, some actual sentiment that he really holds. So those jokes are not straightforward, literal expressions of what we actually believe. They're also not random. They're somehow in the orbit of what we actually believe. They bear some relation to the things that we actually believe. We can draw certain conclusions sometimes about what a person is actually thinking and what they actually mean, their actual view of the world, based upon the jokes that they tell. So the question is, how do we determine between jokes that are innocent and jokes that are well-meaning versus jokes that are malicious or jokes that cross the line, jokes that are horribly offensive? The philosopher Paul Butterfield has written a piece about this called Focusing on the Gap. And in this paper, I make the case that there are certain things we can do. Sorry. Because humor is ambiguous. Because I can tell a joke about a group of people or about a person, and my opinions on that matter are radically unclear. When we're making ethical judgments about the jokes that a person is telling, we have to be heavily reliant, more so than in other forms of conversation, other forms of speech. We have to be very heavily reliant on contextual clues. Without context, the actual literal text of what I said tells us almost nothing about the moral value of my speech when I'm joking. Because in one scenario, one speaker can tell a joke and it can be a genuine expression of hateful sentiments. And the exact same joke, I mean textually, the exact same joke, the exact same words, can in another context by another speaker be entirely innocent. And so the actual text of the joke tells us very little on its own, devoid of context, about what the speaker was thinking when they told their joke. Unlike non-humorous speech, if I straightforwardly tell you what I think about Catholics, and then someone asks you, what does Paul think about Catholics? Well, you know, because I told you, I just gave you that information. You can tell someone what I think because I informed you. But if I joke about Catholics, the mere text of the joke does not inform you of that. It's almost entirely context dependent. And so we have to rely very heavily on contextual clues when we're making moral judgments about jokes as compared with moral judgments about other forms of speech. These are not perfect, by the way. Relying on contextual clues is not going to it's not going to give us a 100% accurate way of discerning exactly what a speaker is thinking, exactly what a speaker means. These are not perfect methods for doing that. I think what they are is they're our best attempt. They're a decent way of getting an educated guess about whether the person joking about some particular topic really means some version of what they say, or whether they just happen to find or think of a funny quip. One contextual clue that you might use when I make a joke to discern what I mean by that is your history of interactions with me. If someone tells a joke about Jewish people and you're trying to figure out if this joke was a manifestation of some actual anti-Semitism or whether it was instead just a funny quip someone thought of. One useful contextual clue is your history of interactions with that person and the question of whether your interactions with that person have ever given you the impression that person might harbor some genuine negative sentiment towards Jewish people. The conversational context is going to be a contextual clue that's really helpful for this. Did the joke make sense in context? Were we in a conversational context in which we were sharing light-hearted quips, in which we were being silly? Or was the joke a sort of weird non sequitur that came from a place of serious conversation? That will often tell us the motivations of the person speaking, what point they were trying to make when they told the joke. Straightforwardly, giving you a disclaimer might be a way of giving you a contextual clue about my intentions when I joke. If I say to you, look, this joke's kind of edgy, it's going to sound kind of bad, I really harbor no ill will, I really harbor no feeling towards this group at all. It's going to sound bad, but it's just a funny thing I thought of. That's a contextual clue I can give you that my intentions might be pure. The identity of the audience is going to be important. Do you get the sense that the joker has any reason to believe that their audience are going to interpret them as saying something serious or as meaning some element of what they're joking about? And the identity of the speaker, finally, is going to be important. Who is the speaker? Are they part of the social group that they're joking about? What are their social demographics that tell us about what they might intend with the joke that they're telling? Again, when we make moral judgments about the jokes people tell based on these contextual clues, it's not perfect. This is an imperfect way of doing this. It's not 100% accurate. You might have a conversational history with someone who really is a racist, who's really telling racist jokes, and it might not flag up to you because they might have done a really good job of hiding the racism. You might not have had any previous interactions with them that made you think that they would have racist ideas in their head because they've hid it very well. Similarly, a racist telling a racist joke that really is a manifestation of some of their racist sentiments might give you a disclaimer because they know that racism is not accepted in polite society. So they might claim, oh, this is just a joke for its own sake. This really tells you nothing about what I actually think about the group that I'm talking about. They might give you a disclaimer because they don't want you to know that they're being racist. The identity of a speaker is a contextual clue. If they belong to the group they're joking about, that might be a sign that their intentions are innocent, but not perfectly, because there is such a thing as self-hatred and there is such a thing as the internalization of prejudice. And so these clues are not perfect. I think the reason that these clues are not perfect is because it's really hard to tell what someone means when they're joking. It's really hard to discern what is being transmitted in jokes, because jokes, as I say, are radically opaque. The intentions of a speaker are opaque when they're joking. Humor is radically ambiguous. These kinds of things are our best attempt to interpret what's being said and to make moral judgments about what's being said. Which brings us to the third of the questions I posed at the start of today's talk, which is the question of why we seem to have a certain ethical leeway to joke about our own groups that we don't have to joke about other groups. It seems that we can get away with joking about groups that we belong to more so than groups that we don't belong to. I actually want to make a stronger claim than this. I actually think that social identity is not just morally relevant in cases of joke telling. I think social identity is particularly morally relevant, unusually morally relevant in cases of joke telling as compared with other cases of conversation, as compared with other cases of speech. I think social identity plays an unusually central role in the moral value of what we're saying when we're joking compared to when we're not joking. So when not being attacked at award ceremonies, Chris Rock in his stand-up comedy specials often has jokes that target or satirize or skewer aspects of Black American culture and of specific Black American people. He also makes fun of white supremacy and racism and all sorts of other stuff, but a significant portion of Rock's material is him satirizing and making fun of aspects and features of Black American culture. And it's often pointed out, and it's obviously true, that a huge part of the reason why Rock gets away with this, why we don't find this too objectionable, is the fact that Rock is himself a Black American. If he was, for example, a white guy, there are tons and tons of examples of jokes that Chris Rock has told in his stand-up specials that would be horribly offensive. But because he belongs to the group in question, the jokes that he tells are ethically permissible. Compare this to, for example, an interview that Kanye West gave in 2018 with the news site TMZ, where, amongst other things, West said that when he thinks about the history of slavery in North America, when he thinks about the length of time that the institution of slavery took place across, he, Kanye West, believes that on some level, that must have been a choice that Black people were making. He said that on some level, Black people must have been choosing slavery for it to have lasted as long as it did. He was not joking. This was not humorous. He was non-humorously expressing his view. Compared to Rock, the fact that Kanye West is himself a Black American did very little for him, I think, ethically. I think the fact that Kanye West is himself belongs to the group of Black Americans did very little to transform the moral value of what he said. He was not, the response to what he said in that interview was not that it was okay because he belonged to the group in question, not okay because he was talking about a group to which he belongs. Kanye West being Black did very little ethical work for him when he said what he said non-humorously, when he said what he said seriously. So I say all this just to draw a distinction between how important your social group identity is in jokes versus how important your social group identity is when you're not joking. So the last part of the talk is trying to, with reference to this, this idea of contextual clues, trying to explain why this would be. Why would social identity be especially relevant in cases of joking? So to explain this, I want us to imagine the following scenario. Suppose someone you respect and trust makes some insulting joke about a culture or a nationality that you belong to. This was not a real conversation. This is merely inspired by true events. It's not an actual. Okay. So someone you like and respect has told an insulting joke about your culture or nationality. Okay. Now let's try and think of reasons why this person might have told this insulting joke. The answer is that there's many reasons. There are many motivations that a person might have for having told the insulting joke about your nationality, the insulting joke about your culture. We've kind of touched on this already. I've sort of mentioned this previously. They might be straightforwardly expressing their view, but just disguising it as a joke. They really want to say it. They know it's not polite, so they disguise it as a joke. They might be exaggerating their view. They might generally believe some version of what they're saying, but they're exaggerating it for comic effect. They might be just trying to be provocative or shocking, because shocking speech is often humorous. Or they might be being ironic. There might be a gesture of solidarity. They might be making fun of the bigots who would actually believe that thing about your nationality or your culture. So there are tons of potential interpretations. There are tons of potential motivations for why the person you thought was your friend ended up telling the joke that they told. Lots of motivations, lots of reasons to pick from. Okay. So in this context, when someone tells a joke about your culture or a joke about your nationality, the contextual clue of their social identity can do a lot of work for us. The fact that Chris Rock is a Black American himself can do a lot of work for us. There are many reasons why they might have told that joke, and the contextual clue of them belonging to the group helps us to pick from these various viable live options, live interpretations, live motivations for why they might have told that joke. There's a lot of work for a contextual clue like that to do for us in this context. But suppose your friend who you liked and respected just says something serious that's insulting about your nationality or culture, and they're not joking, right? As part of this example, imagine that it's not a joke. That they're being non-humorous. And now try to imagine the various reasons they might have said this. Well, compared to when they were joking, different interpretations are pretty thin on the ground. Someone straightforwardly insults your nationality, insults your culture. One reason they might do this is because they're genuinely expressing their actual view of your culture or nationality. Other reasons are kind of thin on the ground. There aren't that many other options to choose from. That is far and away the most likely reason why they said that thing. There isn't a whole range of motivations or interpretations that are live here. And as a result, a contextual clue like the speaker belonging to the group they're talking about doesn't really help us. We don't have a bunch of options. And so when the speaker says something negative, some negative trope about Jewish people, and they themselves are Jewish, but they're not joking, well, I might want to give them the benefit of the doubt. Their identity might give me a reason to give them the benefit of the doubt, but there's very little benefit of the doubt to give. There are very few interpretations. This is why I think social identity is particularly morally relevant in cases of joking, more so than in other cases of speech. That was a bit of a whistle-stop tour. I think I only went slightly over, so thanks for bearing with me. And I'd like to open to questions, I guess.
I've actually got a question that I'd like to ask while I bring Danny the microphone. You had mentioned, and I of course totally agree, that social identity is something that's very, very important with when you're making jokes. But you had also commented about how when somebody keeps telling the same kind of joke, you start to get insight into what they really think and what they really mean and believe.
Yeah.
How does a professional comedian then get away with telling the same series of jokes over and over while they're on tour? Is it possible that perhaps in addition to social identity, somebody's profession also allows them access into a certain mode of joke telling that the rest of us don't have?
Yes, I certainly think that it does. Forgive me, I'm going to answer your question in a fairly broad way. Yes, I think your profession being I'm sorry, is my mic still working? Is this still, yeah. I think your profession being comedian does does have a significant effect on the jokes that you have some ethical leeway to tell. And retell, because could be part of your social identity. I think the one of the things that being a comedian does for you is it gives some context. It explains why you're bothering to tell a joke in the first place, right? So when one inserts a joke into an otherwise serious conversation with colleagues and you're not a comedian, one of the questions that suggests that you had some fairly hefty motivation to tell that joke, because you inserted it into an otherwise non-humorous conversation, something like that. If you're being paid money to tell jokes, well, that gives us a starting place where we can say, well, I understand why this person is telling jokes in the first place. I at least understand why, telling a joke about a particular group doesn't necessarily mean this person has an axe to grind. They have to tell some jokes. It's part of their profession that they must tell some jokes. And so there's an ethical leeway I think we get from that just by virtue of the fact that, like, the fact that you are telling some jokes makes sense in context. And I would say a similar thing for repeating the jokes. Well, comedians tour and they have many, many dates, and you can't write an entirely new comedy special every single time. So that would help to explain why the joke came up again and again.
We've had very similar conversations with artists and theater and book burnings. There's always been censorship, and should this be allowed? Should this not be allowed? Do you think that comedians have the liberty of some sort of gray area because they often propagate jokes that they didn't write? And so is the gray area in the retelling, so we can't really hold them to the same standards of censorship because it may or may not be their own genuine material?
You mean because they might have writers and stuff?
I'm not that.
Yeah, my suspicion about that, Danny, is probably that there's not a great deal of leeway to give there, because when one is let's say a famous comedian, and to have writers, you would have to be a fairly successful comedian, I guess. And you present these jokes, you have people who write them, but you present them yourself. I think you're making a pretty serious statement. I think you take a serious amount of ownership when you are the face of that joke, when you are the person telling the joke to the audience in the comedy special or whatever. I don't think there's a great deal of wiggle room there. I think that you probably have to accept that I have made myself the face of this joke. I am in some way a curator of jokes if people are writing for me. So I think you probably have to take a great deal of responsibility, a similar amount of responsibility to if you'd just written the joke yourself.
Well, I have 2 points. When you say you couldn't think of, if someone was insulting Scotland, why on earth would they do this if they didn't actually mean it? It occurs to me, maybe it was revenge.
Yeah.
Could you go back to the slide where you show the 5 contextual things? Yeah, get rid of that one. No, go further back. Keep going back. No, keep going.
What's that?
Keep there. The 5 there.
Oh, sorry. That was an honest mistake. That was not. I was not doing a bit there. That was a genuine. I genuinely thought it was. Right. Sorry.
Sure, I'll believe you. Yeah, something occurs to me. I wonder what you say if you thought there's one thing there that you might want to add, which is the identity of the target of the joke. Mm-hmm. Because, for instance, supposing you heard about one person who told a whole series of jokes about Down syndrome kids, and another person told a whole series of jokes about hedge fund managers. Wouldn't that affect your sort of a first thought about the ethics of those jokes, even though it's something outside of those?
Yes, absolutely. So, yeah, this was not intended to be exhaustive. No, I absolutely agree. I think definitely, yeah. Yes, I would certainly include the target of the jokes as part of the the range of considerations we make when we make ethical judgments about jokes. Yeah. No, this was this was not meant to be a be all and end all. This was just some examples, but I think you've found another.
I like that list, and I like the idea that it might not be complete yet. Seems to me that Professor Westacott in the second case might just as well be joking as he was in the first. And wouldn't you be using those same things to figure out whether he's joking or not, whether he's being ironic? Couldn't you take every serious utterance as a joke or a pun or an example, and you have to use those same things?
Yeah, so I guess I was stipulating, I was merely stipulating in the second case that they weren't joking. I was saying, let's imagine that they're not joking. This is not intended to be humorous. But I mean, your question is still relevant. That doesn't mean that your question doesn't make sense. Yes, I think we would use a lot of these same contextual clues to figure out whether or not someone is joking. With enough time, it would be good to unpack the semantics of what it means to be joking, which we don't necessarily have right now, except to say that some people, there's a bit of ambiguity between the idea of joking, meaning I am not in any way expressing what I really believe, which is one definition of joking that's sometimes used. But another definition, and the one that I'm going to gesture at it here, the definition I'm thinking of with joking is a part of speech where one of the primary motivations is to cause comic amusement. And I can do that while still expressing things I believe. I can, and in fact, we often do. I mean, you hang around in liberal or left-wing circles and you hear a lot of jokes about conservatives or Republicans. You know, you hear, so we do sometimes express real sentiments that we hold while also joking. We're joking in the sense that we're trying to be funny. So Beth, I feel like I haven't quite answered your question. A lot of it would depend on which interpretation of the term joking we're using.
There is a question on Zoom also. How much do you think one's actual beliefs behind a joke influences the harm done? If Emrys says he hates Scotland because of some sort of offensive generalization, but doesn't actually, does that mitigate the actual harm done at all compared to if he did believe it?
Yeah, right. Yes. Yes. That's an excellent question, and it is one, in fact, that I do actually touch on in this paper. Does the question of whether Emrys meant it really affect the harm that's caused? Yeah, okay. Not necessarily. In the paper, I talk about how we have a duty not merely to not express insulting views about other people's cultures or social groups, but we also, when we're joking, because jokes are ambiguous, we also have a duty to not be seen to be seriously expressing our views. And so merely having good intentions is not going to mitigate the harm. Often what we have to do is have good intentions and make it clear that our intentions are good. If I tell you a joke about some group, if I tell you a joke about Hispanic people, and I really harbor no ill feeling towards Hispanic people, nevertheless, if I give the impression, if the way I tell the joke gives the impression that I might, and if I'm around people who respect my opinion and look up to me, I can still be causing harm even though my intentions are perfectly pure, even though my intentions are perfectly innocent. And so Yes, intentions are not always, having good intentions is not always going to get us out of trouble. Having good intentions and making a good faith attempt to demonstrate that we have good intentions while we're joking, often that is going to make a difference. Often the fact that we have tried to make it clear that our intentions are pure, often that is going to make a difference, not just the intentions themselves.
So I had a question, but I'm not really sure how to phrase it. It's about skill and skill of the joke teller, that ability to pull it off, and how that factors into this, because this list, which I appreciate very much written out like this, kind of is like a rubric that you can apply, but then where does skill come in, and how does that, it could be applied to the context, the identity, and how they someone were to use that. Anyway, so I'm not really sure how to phrase it, but skill.
I think a lot of people and a lot of academics in this field believe that skill makes a difference. Believe that how good you are at telling, how good the joke is, like aesthetically, like its aesthetic qualities affect how much moral leeway you have, or how much moral justification you have for making the joke. Forgive me if this is not a satisfying answer. I don't believe so. I disagree. I think that the skill you have, I think those who believe that being able to skillfully tell a joke gives you license to say more than someone who's kind of clumsy at it. I don't think that makes a huge moral difference, because I think that when we think of jokes that the comedian Jimmy Carr makes about the Holocaust, for example, he's very skilled. He's very good at what he does. He's very well rehearsed and well refined. But I don't think that mitigates any of the possibility that his audience, which is huge, who some of whom look up to him, some of whom are impressionable, might nevertheless think that he's transmitting something he really believes, and because they look up to him, might be convinced by what he says. My opinion, which is controversial, which a lot of people disagree with, is that skill plays very little role.
Sorry.
I'm being looked at as if I make the. I don't make the decisions. I'm just.
I have sort of two questions. One related a bit to skill, but distinct. How, since a comedian is taking ownership of the material they're sharing, wouldn't the fact that they're being paid to tell and propagate certain jokes potentially mean it's more harmful when or even worse ethically at times, depending on the jokes they're making?
Yeah, could you tell me more about why you think it might be morally worse to be getting paid for it?
Because they're profiting off of, well, I don't know. I guess it. Yes. Yeah, so people are paying for that. They are sort of cultivating an audience who appreciates that. They're also profiting off of the material they're representing. So I would say that could definitely complicate things as a professional comedian. But then I guess another question I have is about a very particular kind of joke, and it touches on Emrys's point about the target. Jokes of mistaken identity or comparisons of the joke teller's identity to another group. Do you have any guidelines, thoughts about that kind of thing? I mean, one thing that comes to mind is someone who identifies as male and uses he, him pronouns, does something that is characteristically interpreted as female and makes a joke about it. Depending a lot on some of these things that could be interpreted as more the target is females rather than about the jokester themselves.
Yeah.
And another that comes to mind that maybe many of us have seen from Seinfeld when Kramer hurts his tongue and is mistaken for someone who is disabled and invited to a very special like dinner for people who are disabled and recognized because he lives on his own. And so I'm wondering what you think about this kind of joke and if you have any thoughts.
Yeah. And jokes often set things up so that I have a theory of how humor works that's kind of independent of the ethical stuff I've been talking about. I think that humor works based upon a certain interplay between things that are congruous and expected, leading to things that are incongruous and unexpected, and that things are humorous when there's a kind of logical link. So when something highly unexpected or unusual happens, but it kind of makes sense in the context of what's to come before. I think that's a huge part of what makes things funny is extracting the absurd from an otherwise normal situation. And I think that can help when we're thinking about cases like the one you're talking about. Often self-deprecating humor of the kind you're talking about will indirectly insult the group you're comparing yourself to, because you're putting yourself down by saying, oh, I'm like in the Seinfeld example, I'm like a disabled person or something like that. And the joke then has splash damage because it then implies something insulting about, for example, disabled people. So in a case like that, I think a helpful question to ask is, what would have to be true for this joke to work? All right. So in the example with Kramer, I think it would have to be somehow embarrassing or insulting to be a disabled person. I think that the joke only works on the assumption that there's something embarrassing or that someone believing that you're disabled is somehow you have somehow been put down or just disrespected. Often in the sitcom Friends, the Ross or Chandler, it's a recurring kind of trope that they often get mistaken for gay, and people think that they're gay or whatever. And the jokes there only work on the assumption that there's something embarrassing about being a straight man who is mistaken for a gay man. The jokes only work if we, on some level, agree that it's an insult to be thought of as gay. And so, yeah, I think that's the question we can ask that reveals why the examples you're talking about can be insulting to the group in question.
I think with your question, it feels like, oh, yeah, all of this. Because if it's not an expression of an insult, then maybe it's perpetuating stereotypes as well. So I struggle to think of a context where it would be, and that's what would be an example where we'd be like, oh, that's perfect.
So I'm not 100% sure what you're asking. What would make it okay to impersonate someone? Or
other question is, how do you make a joke if you can't ever? So clearly, you're saying whatever, okay, but on the other hand, how can you ever make a joke unless you're teasing or picking fun at something, which inherently brings the other side more very much, and never make a joke. Does that make sense? Yeah, yeah.
Why do we need that constraint? We can't all acknowledge the joke can be different to 10 different people. We can't accept that.
That's kind of what I'm saying. You can't.
Run the radio station, don't buy the ticket. I mean, where's the line? If everything is framed as an insult or a hurtful contact as opposed to.
Not all. You make a joke.
No, not at all, but who's a speedy up?
Isn't that kind of why it's philosophy?
I'll be here all day.
We've got time for maybe one more question.
Yeah, which is right here. You've talked about, focus is the ethics of humor. Are there any specific comedians? I mean, we all have our favorite comedians, right? Are there any specific comedians who you find to be, unacceptably unethical? And if the answer is yes, who are they?
Yeah. Yeah, so you heard of don't suppose you've heard of a British comedian called Bernard Manning? Kind of old school comedian called Bernard Manning. No. Quite talented. But Bernard Manning was comedically quite talented, and his timing, his joke work was quite good. And he played to a lot of working men's clubs in England when he was alive. And he claimed to joke about everyone all the same. His claim was that it's about everyone, so he was an equal opportunities offender, and that was simply not true. He told jokes about people of color and disabled people. That was really who he joked, and women, and occasionally gay people. He had very specific groups that he joked about, and he specifically joked about that because he knew his audience, and he knew that their attitudes skewed towards taking a dim view of the targets of his jokes. And I think he was really in while it was comedy and while it was humorous, and by the way, I think he was good. I think Bernard Manning was a talented comedian. I think he had skill. I think he was very, he was clearly profiting off the fact, he was clearly benefiting from the fact that his audience really did have regressive views about the people he was joking about. And I could give you a bunch of old school British comedians who are of a similar vein to that. I think there was something really nasty about that kind of comedy that was popular, I don't know, in the second half of the 20th century in the UK. So Bernard Manning would be one, and there are a number of comedians of his ilk that I would say I have a similar view about.
Thanks. Good talk.
How do you feel about Emrys Weston?
Exactly. So this was something someone said earlier, and I was saying it occurred to me that I hope and I believe that Emrys will not be offended by the way that which, by the way, I did not run past him. That Emrys was surprised. I did not. I did not vet it with Emrys, and I think that I have established enough of a rapport and a previous relationship with Emrys that I know that I'm going to get away with it. It's okay, and I think that's because that's because I know enough about the context in which I tell the joke. Yeah.
I know there were two people that were hoping to ask a question. If you both don't have a class at 1:20 and Paul does not, feel free to come on up and ask a question.